So, comrades, I've organized the talk. It's quite extensive, but I'm not going to be going through all of the slides in absolute detail. I hope that the comrades keep the slides and the text that's in it to allow us a sense of the content that I want to share. And if it's all right, if I can move. Yeah, and that's how it's structured. I'm going to start moving through. So there's many things that have been raised by the two comrades that have spoken already, as well as the introduction to today's session. And there's a lot of resonance with what's been raised already with the materials I'm going to be presenting. Yeah, so for us to start with, it's important, as the comrades have recognized already, we live in a combined, uneven, yet common world. Yeah, and so once we see the screen itself, comrades, yeah, if that's all right, yeah. So, comrades, I'm sorry it doesn't come across as clearly, but if you look at the graphic, the graph, you'd see the population status of different parts of the world. That's what those lines indicate. They also give you a sense at the pace at which the populations in different parts of the world are growing. You'd see, of course, that the two blue lines on the top indicate components of the Asian population, or those that are located in Asia itself. Yeah. But as you come down that, if you look at the third line on that graph, comrades, that's us in Southern Africa. And you see the sharpness of the curve at which our population is growing relative to all the others, which are almost straightening out, if not tending towards negative growth. So in other words, a huge amount of the future population of the world is going to be based on our continent of Africa itself. The graphic next to that indicates, to the best available information we have, the size of the economies. And you'd notice on that, right at the top of that circle, is the entire output of Africa, measured in capitalist terms. Inside that, I hope comrades pay attention. South Africa is only the third and slipping down largest economy in Africa. It's quite an important point that we take note of as well. So from that very harsh statistic, let's move on a little bit. A while ago, in 1996, when talk of the internet and the future being digital was quite resonant amongst people, a key question being asked by those activists pushing forward the ideas of the internet and ensuring connectivity was the negative impact of government on the performance of the internet itself. And that's where John Perry Barlow made a famous declaration of independence of cyberspace. Yeah, you'd note there, John Perry Barlow was asking for government to step aside and to allow a people's sovereignty. Well, if we fast forward from 1996 to our present, you know, the words of John Perry Barlow have actually been borne out. In other words, today, we don't see very much of government other than those such as the People's Republic of China. What we do see is the dominance of these firms, Google, Facebook, Alibaba, Tencent, yeah, that dominate the entire landscape of the internet itself. So in other words, this perverse way in which the private sector has come to occupy the internet itself is quite an important feature of our current situation. Yeah. And you'd see this also then in terms of the percentage of the population. This is from 2 years ago. published by the International Telecommunications Union. So it's based on official statistics. Yeah, so this is what the governments tell the UN organization ITU, how much of the population is using the internet. And you'd look at across that graphic, you look at the world systems that are being displayed there, and you'd see the correspondence, especially in terms of Africa, which has very low percentage participation. Some of the reasons comrades have already raised, especially from Comrade Trevor earlier. Then we look at the total population using the internet. And this one, comrades, it's not based on official data. This is based on the trends. And you'd see the link to the site, and you can go there for updates on this data. But the estimate as we move towards a population, in November, the United Nations suggests our world population will be 8 billion people. Yeah. So currently, according to this data, 5.25 billion people use the internet worldwide. That's now 2/3 of the global population. Yeah. But look across the span. Africa is a continent of 1.3 billion people. Yeah, but we only represent 11.5% of those using the internet. Yeah, 601 million people in Africa, according to this data. And then the dominance again of the main firms that operate. You know, this also gives you a sense of the different systems at play. Facebook, I think most people are very familiar with it, and you'd see the blue across representing Facebook as the major social platform or social network being utilized. So that's most of the world is covered by Facebook. Because of the particular infrastructure and regime in the People's Republic of China, WeChat occupies that space, and VK is the operator in the Russian Federation at present. Instagram only has a small presence, and that's also due largely in part to the impact of sanctions on some of the countries. But comrades, as Henriette was saying earlier as well, we continue inside the internet to generate more and more data. So here's a snapshot. This is also from a private sector firm called Domo that measures how much of data is being produced. Now, comrades, if you look at that, every 1 minute of the day, TikTok users watch 167 million videos. Now, remember, if this is thinking of it as a pipeline, the pipeline through which we enter the internet has to cover all of this data that's moving through it. So it's quite important then that the infrastructure that we have in place has the capacity, has the electricity, the energy system that allows it to work first. And then within it has sufficient space for all of this. I mean, you look at those Zoom, maybe some people are using that, while at the same time Netflix, YouTube, right across the system there. Facebook itself, there's a difference between how many people are viewing Facebook and those uploading 240,000 photos a minute. That's a significant amount. And comrades can see right across the system the extent to which how much more data intensive the internet is actually becoming. Yeah. But comrades, if we pause a little, part and parcel of us returning to utilizing or appreciating that we as people can bring about changes that improve our quality of life. And in fact, because of the ecological catastrophe confronting us all, our very survival is driven by the narratives that we tell about the systems that we are inside. And so some interesting work done by a literary theorist would suggest if we use a deterministic portrayal of the internet, you know, and this then frames it as in the internet was created by the United States of America's Department of Defense. And we look at then subsequently what has happened and how even these private sector firms that now have such huge dominance were initially funded by the United States of America government, we'd get a particular view of the internet itself, and specifically the World Wide Web. Yeah, and you'd see in this, if using that deterministic narrative framing, we kind of think of it as a mixture between how people caricature a generation from the 60s as being hippies and their link with something which is very present right to today, the military-industrial complex, the key economic bloc or organization underpinning empire and the United States of America. So in contrast to that more structural view, you have one which is individualistic and personalized, which takes a view of the entrepreneur, the person leading this, as being a hero. Yeah, and in many instances here's where you hear names like Steve Jobs. You even hear the chap who comes from our province, apparently Elon Musk, etc. But apparently, all because of their individual struggles, we today have the internet as it is. Now, both of those comrades, I want to suggest, sharing the view of Figlerowitz, that these are inadequate to describe where we are today. Rather, we need to pay much more attention to alternative understandings of the evolution of the internet. Why? Because this is where we will also learn of counter-hegemonic projects inside the dominant narrative of the internet and how it spread. This is extremely important for us, especially if we want to grasp and take forward the internet for Mahala perspective. Yeah. To imagine a better version of the world, we must acknowledge these and embrace the fact that the internet that we have today is a consequence of many different experiments taking place, sometimes simultaneously, that come together to give us the internet as it currently exists. There are both revolutionary potentials built into it, but comrades, as it represents capitalism as it currently exists, it largely also transmits to us a balance of power as it exists in capitalism. In other words, it's a version of class society that gets shown back at us. And the points made about affordability feature very strongly in that. Now, what are the implications of these narratives itself? And again, it's quite important from where we are to draw down on what our own history of the internet has been and how it comes to occupy the space that it does. Yeah, very important to remind people, even though it's factually correct to say the Department of Defense paid for the first internet connection in the world. The first two letters that appeared in a direct communication between two computers was the letters L and O. Maybe they also had ESCOM because they couldn't manage the rest of it. It was meant to be log in. Yeah, but the system crashed after the L and O got on the screen. But it showed, it worked, right? And it's quite important then, comrades, as we take this forward, to see how the internet has evolved in South Africa. And I hope to show you that as we move along and time affords us. But critically, how ordinary people started using the internet. And some of you may remember this, especially maybe in my generation being 50 plus. We remember when the computers came to university. Yeah. And I mean this on a mass scale. We had laboratories that were set up, but we only had so few computers on the screens, and not all of us at the university could go and use the computer at the same time. So we needed to book time on it. And that time sharing became a core part of how what we have today as this huge infrastructure came into being. You see that importance of that lesson of thinking of this system as one of flexibility, of interaction, of a commons, rather than a privatized workspace, which we are currently told is the internet, yeah, has kind of been removed from our memory itself. I leave this slide on because it explains why also it's very important for us to have a mindset shift to help us take forward a free internet process itself. Yeah. So, comrades, as I'm sure all are aware, we coincide today with a historic event a few centuries back in France. And often people raise issues, and I think we've seen it on the flyers as well, about liberty, egalitarianism, and fraternity. We often forget the issue of the guillotine. So, comrades, I'm reminding you of the guillotine this time, but this time with respect to how we understand where we've come from and where we go forward. It's a captivity of the mind that's also important. And the way in which the narrative around the internet, the way in which it's being described in economic terms, is a capitalist rendition of the internet. And it's important us recognizing it is not the only version of the internet or how we come, and utilizing the tools of political economy, how we understand relations of production in society itself helps better explain and inform the political struggle we need to be involved in. So I don't think I need to, with our audience itself, go through all of these details itself, but it's important that we appreciate the internet, even though it's digital, it's out there as an intangible. Comrades, it has a materiality. It affects us in our material lives. Our lives are even being governed through tools that emanate from and that are based on the internet itself. So comrades can make note of it. Christian Fuchs, who is one of the most progressive theorists around the internet, around communications technology, around information itself, sees as a key contributor the work of Smythe. And I would encourage comrades to look at this in much more detail as we move ahead. Yeah. But Fuchs also summarizes for us the functions of the media under capitalism. And there's a lot of resonance with what's being raised here theoretically with the points raised by Comrade Trevor earlier. Yeah. And that the object of pushing forward and using the internet in the form that it is really to drive capital accumulation in the media as an industry itself. Important recognizing it's not just the relationship you'll see later, yeah? Because through this medium, we see marketing taking place, advertising, public relations, the way in which sales are being promoted. Yeah? And this goes across all the sectors, all the other industries, then utilize the internet as the means through which these ideas are diffused into society. Comrades, in this, those last two bullets are so important. They relate to the guillotine point I made. Yeah, it's through this mechanism then that domination and ideological manipulation gets legitimized. We treat it as memes. We smile about these things. We joke about it. People are dying as a consequence, comrades. It's also through this mechanism that the entire power relations of society, class society, gets reproduced, regenerated, and in fact, power gets qualified through it. Yeah. Capitalism then also has a fetish associated with this. It is alienated from those that are producing. It alienates the product of what's being produced. So in that instant, it also affects those comrades working in the sector called, or the internet-based sectors, including media as well. Yeah, and the commodification of this has deeper implications in addition to what Comrade Trevor has raised. And here I draw your attention particularly to that point. When you click on something on the internet, you now as a consumer, you are taking over the role also of a producer. You, in other words, are creating the content that you are then paying to access yourself. Hence, you'll see that term that many are now using, prosumer. That's the way in which this commodification has been intensified itself. Yeah. So, comrades, very much in keeping with what has been raised much earlier on in the session itself. Yeah. Capitalism and the internet are working in concert. And what I mean by this, capitalism is being reproduced, utilizing the mechanism of the internet to transmit its ideas and to ensure its hegemony. Yeah. So, comrades, as we unpack the work, and especially as we determine ways forward from this, you know, here's Fuchs' work where he draws out the salient elements around which our analysis at least has to pay attention to. Yeah. And I would ask, if you don't mind, we are quite familiar with most of the points right up to point E. And it's really from point E that we have to make a much bigger effort in South Africa to connect the struggles taking place over day-to-day issues and bring it to bear on even the future of the internet in South Africa. Otherwise, the internet will merely be a reflection of class society and those power relations played back at us. Yeah. So here, a slight pause as I encourage you just to play a little bit of a thought experiment. We've now come to appreciate and understand the origins of all of our 8 billion fellow human beings, the people with whom we share this planet, the people who make us people itself, yeah, have their origins on this continent called Africa. And if we ask ourselves, where are the intellectual property receipts from things like fire, stone tools, stone axes, etc., where would the rest of the world have been? And it's very important we bear this in mind as we have more and more people clapping their hands for tighter intellectual property, whereas over the last 2 years, the vaccine apartheid has shown us what happens when you commodify what should be public goods and services and turn them into privately appropriable services. Again, comrades, I won't take you through this. This now goes into deep lecture, but just to give you a sense, when we look at us in the long span of history, we must locate these changes that are taking place through the internet inside it. Yeah? And our history, as in those of the global south, was on insertion into a world system. Comrades, no matter how many people go and live in the global north and now carry mandates from organizations there, we have not turned this over between the global north and global south. And those major contradictions continue throughout and persist today. You know, when we talk of post-colonialism, comrades, I'm sure all of you would maybe note, we have more of a neo-colonial situation than a post-colonial situation. We have new instances of power relations being shaped, but they keep us in negative, in other words, unequally connected to the world. And it's not just me raising this.
Comrade, excuse me, comrade. Sorry, comrade. If just a time check, if you could wrap up in the next 4 minutes, please, just so that we could have 10 minutes for comments and questions. Thank you, comrade.
Sure, and my apologies, Comrade Curry. I'm going to go much more rapidly through these, but a key point, just reminding you, this is nothing new. All of us know this itself. But how does this feature in the discourse that we are involved in? Yeah, the huge gap and why we are asked to catch up is premised on underdevelopment that's visited upon Africa on the basis of our unequal insertion into world systems. The overdevelopment in the global north, Western Europe, North America, and Japan, arises from the underdevelopment of the global south. It's a zero-sum game, comrades. There isn't something else that we can fit into that mix itself. And so it's important then also connecting as much as we can be anti-imperialist, the anti-colonial struggles from which we came and which we need to persist on, because the internet is a mechanism through which those colonial unequal relations are being extended. And so when we see how the internet evolves in South Africa, comrades, it's an encouragement for me to look at it within a type of way of understanding A political economy sets a pace, but there's a dominant ideology underpinning that political economy itself. Yeah. And in many instances, even where there have been attempts at progressive transformation, point made by Henriette, we need to be really careful about being sucked into policy discussions which merely serve to legitimize the ideological framing within which those policies are shaped. Yeah. And for this, comrades, we can use the official documents of government itself. So we have a national infrastructure plan that Comrade Market shared with everyone on this site itself. Yeah. You would see in this a huge amount of concessions that are being made. The third bullet point says, while South Africa is far off from the National Development Plan's goals at 2021, the 2030 goals remain in place. Comrades, how can it be that we are so far off the goals last year, but those goals remain the same? Shouldn't it actually demand of us to change the goals to then include the parts that are not working and to come up with mechanisms that fix them? You'd see the 7 points being listed there. All 7 of those points, comrades, were meant to have been dealt with previously. Now, these are the points that are being raised back on the agenda again. Now, when it comes to the material realities we are inside, even this National Infrastructure Plan acknowledges these things. It recognizes that things are not working. There's been very poor progress on digital enablement of government services. I'm sure any comrade that goes to Department of Home Affairs now recognizes this as well. You know, we now find out that switches and certain certificates were not updated. This isn't something we need to have a policy discussion about. It's something that should have been fixed. Was it being done deliberately so that government in that instance and the state-owned enterprises were set up for failure as opposed to being the instrument through which that deployment of broadband could have been possible? I'm at the close to the end, comrade. You know, and again, I would encourage all to read through the detail. I won't be able to say it all out to you, but this is a litany of failures. And this is not being written as a left-wing Marxist or otherwise critique. This is inside the very government document published by the government printers. And it concedes to all these changes. A key shock for me is, having gone through all of this, the argument is government needs to work with the private sector to deliver this. It's that very same link with the private sector that's caused the failure itself, yet we are being told that government has no capacity, capability, or competence to deliver. So, comrades, and I hope these points then pick up on what the comrades have raised earlier and hopefully through the rest of the discussion. Just 3 main conclusions. The one is we have to locate the discussion of the internet inside an engagement about a global knowledge commons. We are here today because of the knowledges of our ancestors passed on to us and through which we predict today and the future from it. Yeah? But that knowledge is being enclosed. And once it's enclosed, it becomes appropriable. In other words, someone gets to make money off that knowledge itself. We must also never forget this, and we can't in terms of our location. Yeah? Our way of seeing the world, our ways, it's a plural, comrades, of seeing the world have been extinguished. The modernity that we are told that we are heading towards is premised on a singular, totalizing version of the world, which is West European and after the occupation of North America. Yeah. So, comrades, the final point for me then, recognizing the internet as a general purpose infrastructure, then requires of us to recognize it as the carrier of high quality. It shouldn't be something that gets dumped. Public goods and services that are universally accessible. This should be public goods and services, comrades. There's a lot more references, and thank you very much, Comrade Emma. And I'm sorry I ran over the time.